Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and today we continue our journey into the Halo mythos. The tipping point of the war against the Flood was the Fate of Maethrillian, the catastrophic destruction of the Forerunner capital world. This disaster marked the beginning of the end of their civilization, showing that even the centre of Forerunner governance was not immune to the ravages of the implacable parasite. When news of the Master Builder's secret and illegal attack on the Sanshayum reached the Forerunner Council on Maethrillian, he was immediately arrested and all Halo rings were quickly recalled to be destroyed. Every installation returned to the capital except one, the rogue Halo that Mendicant Bias, seduced by the Primordial, now controlled. The Master Builder was put on trial for his unlawful use of the Halo weapon, and the Council sought Bornstellar out as a witness. He was transported to Maethrillian and told that the Didact was believed to have died at the hands of the Master Builder. Bornstellar's testimony then became critical, as he was the only Forerunner observer of the events which followed the Didact's awakening, both at Charam Hakor and Janjur Kum. Before the trial could proceed, however, the capital came under attack. Mendicant Bias brought the rogue Halo to Maethrillian and quickly subverted 4 other Halo installations, taking control of them. The battle which followed became known as the Fate of Maethrillian. At its climax, Mendicant Bias fired the installations under his control, wiping out the Forerunner Council. Only a fraction of the Forerunners occupying the capital managed to evacuate. The Lifeworkers opened an immense portal near Maethrillian, a rift directly into slipspace, allowing them to travel interstellar distances. Bornstellar managed to escape into the portal, arriving at the secret Ark installation located well outside the Milky Way. Although some of the Halo rings were sent through the Lifeworker portal to the Ark, only one other installation survived. Mendicant Bias took the rogue Halo into a long-forsaken star system, hoping to make repairs before the Forerunners discovered its location. But Bornstellar, empowered with the knowledge and rank of the original Didact, returned a short time later to subdue both Mendicant Bias and the Primordial, with Forerunner military forces now under his command. Mendicant Bias was detained for examination, but Bornstellar placed the Primordial into an inverse temporal stasis field, viciously accelerating the creature's age until it disintegrated. Afterward, the rogue Halo was converted to match the design of the Lesser Ark's smaller rings, which had remained hidden during the assault on the capital. The reshaping process of this last Halo would result in the creation of Installation 07, the 7th and final Halo ringworld to comprise the array. The weapon of last resort was finally complete. During the struggle for this ringworld, Bornstellar's human ally Chakas had been composed, and his data essence integrated into a Forerunner ancilla known as a monitor. Along with this newfound immortality, Chakas would now receive a great burden from Bornstellar. Renamed 343 Guilty Spark, Chakas would become one of the 7 monitors tasked with safeguarding the Halo installations across epochs of time, a fate which would eventually bring him in contact once again with humanity. Although Mendicant Bias had been captured, his imprisonment would not last. The highly resourceful Ancilla escaped and continued to pose a threat to all that remained of Forerunner civilization. With the fall of the Forerunner capital and the status of the Didact shield worlds unknown, only one refuge remained: the Ark. As one of the two immense factories of the Halo installations, the Greater Ark was hidden far outside the galaxy's border and guarded by the last of the original rings, Omega Halo. It was believed to be safe from the Flood. Such hopes ultimately proved to be empty. Using the precursor's ancient star roads, both Omega Halo and the Greater Ark were brought to ruin by the Primordial and the Flood. The Master Builder, who had managed to escape the ruin of the capital, summoned his forces and pursued the original Didact into the burn. The Flood had overwhelmed much of the Ecumene, and in desperation he believed that the Didact might still hold the key to ending the threat. The Master Builder discovered that his old adversary had been captured by a Gravemind, a centralized Flood hive mind. This grotesque amalgam of host victims was the culmination of the Flood's evolution. In this stage, the parasite became even more dangerous than before, now capable of communicating across vast distances and controlling millions of infected hosts at once. Shockingly, this Gravemind also carried with it the consciousness of the ancient Primordial. The insidious creature had transmitted its essence into the hive mind's massive neural network before physically perishing. Now, as long as the Flood survived, so would the Primordial. And with the entirety of the Flood at its command, the last precursor now wielded unimaginable power in its quest for revenge. The Gravemind had mysteriously allowed the Didact to go free. The Forerunner, driven mad by his encounter with the Primordial, returned to his primary shield world, Requiem, dwelling on what he had learned. Here, in complete secrecy, he gathered his most loyal warriors, the Prometheans, and used the Composer to integrate their essences into resilient, heavily weaponized combat skins that could withstand the trauma of directly engaging the Flood. These newly forged Promethean knights were deployed across many systems, and though they caused the parasite to retreat, they were too few in number to sustain these efforts. With the Lifeworkers' conservation measure nearly complete, and the activation of the array seemingly unavoidable, the Librarian attempted to work with both the original Didact and his progeny, the Born Stellar Didact, to finalize her plans for the repopulation of the galaxy. When the three arrived at Omega Halo, however, the Didact brought his warship Mantle's approach to bear. Hundreds of thousands of humans had been settled on the Halo by the Librarian. Without warning, the Didact used a Composer to extract their essences, conscripting them into his Promethean force. He viewed this as a just punishment for the humans, whom he blamed for bringing the Flood into the Forerunner Ecumene. Enraged by the Didact's actions, the Librarian pursued him to Requiem. There she managed to render him unconscious before locking him away yet again in a cryptum to meditate on the error of his ways. Returning to Erd Tyrene, the Librarian would spend her final days gathering the last specimens of humanity in order to replace those her husband had composed, relocating them to the Lesser Ark, where they would be safe from the Flood. The Master Builder prepared to make a final stand against the parasite at the Greater Ark, where the last major remnant of the Forerunner civilization dwelt. Mendicant Bias, now reunited with the Primordial in the form of the Gravemind, had led the Flood to the Ark's doorstep. To answer this threat, the Master Builder deployed a new ancilla, Offensive Bias, to direct what remained of the Forerunner's great fleets, as well as Omega Halo. Here he set up a last line of defence against the Flood. Yet this battle would not end in victory. With unimaginable numbers and power, the Flood devastated Omega Halo and the Greater Ark, destroying all those who had taken shelter there. The last bastion for the Foreigners was now headed for the Lesser Ark, where Bornstella initiated plans to finally activate the Halo Array. After arriving at the Lesser Ark, Bornstella worked to distribute the 7 ring worlds, making up the final Halo Array, around the galaxy. Each would be sent with its monitor. Bornstella sent Chakas, now 343 Guilty Spark, to Alpha Halo, the first ring installation that he planned to activate. Not long after the ring worlds reached their correct positions, relays indicated that the Flood's vast fleets were now approaching the Lesser Ark, led by Mendicant Bias. Having narrowly survived the destruction of the Greater Ark, Offensive Bias, and what remained of his Foreigner fleet, moved to meet the Flood at the edge of the galaxy, hoping to buy Bornstella more time. During this battle, Bornstella activated the array, and Halo's destructive energies surged across the galaxy, annihilating both fleets, Forerunner and Flood. Mendicant Bias's manned vessels suddenly became lifeless, floating husks. The Ancilla's greatest strength, the Flood's immense numbers, had come to nothing. After neutralizing the last of the enemy ships, Offensive Bias apprehended its predecessor, and Bornstella sentenced Mendicant Bias to permanent confinement on the Lesser Ark. In one fateful moment, the firing of Halo, the galaxy was rid of the Flood, at least for a time. In the decades that followed, the few Foreigners who had survived began to send specimens saved during the conservation measure back to their respective homeworlds, reseeding those places where they could now live free from the threat of the Flood. Some even hoped that the librarians' efforts would allow humanity to rise to prominence once more and become the inheritors of all that the Foreigners had left behind, including the mantle. They would be given the status of reclaimers. As time passed, the surviving Foreigners were lost from history, slipping into distant memory and legend. Those species that had been saved by the librarians' efforts would later begin to pursue science and technology on their own. The Halo rings remained hidden and dormant, their monitors carefully safeguarding the immense installations and the dormant Flood specimens they held for research into a possible cure. Long after the Foreigners, a fragment of Mendicant Bias managed to escape confinement and found his way into a local key ship, a vessel used to repopulate humans on Erd Tyrene. Borrowing himself into the ship, Mendicant Bias departed from the Ark and headed towards the Milky Way. This time, however, the Ancilla was not driven by wrath or madness, but rather remorse, attempting to make amends for his crimes against the Foreigners and the Mantle. His plan was to help humanity achieve the status of reclaimers. Unable to fully control the vessel in his weakened state, Mendicant was forced to alter course to seek additional aid from humanity's ancient allies, the Sanchayum. Unfortunately, his efforts were cut short when the key ship crashed on Janjur-Kum. Though Mendicant Bias had set out to fulfill the librarian's designs for humankind, it would ironically lead to the formation of the Covenant, one of the greatest threats humanity would ever face.